So this giant rescue mission executed by God himself to save humanity was in the works since the beginning of the fall. But isn't it interesting? How did God save humanity? By taking humanity to himself, by taking on a body, a human body, and living, suffering, dying, and rising in that body. That's God's plan of redemption. It's also how he reveals that God is a Trinity, an eternal exchange of love. But isn't this crazy to think that what saves us, what redeems us? Well, it's Jesus living, suffering, dying, and rising in his body. Well, why didn't he just do that when he was an infant? You ever wonder that? If all it took for God to save us was for him to die and rise, well, remember when Herod was doing the massacre of the infants in Bethlehem just after Jesus was born? Why wouldn't he just allow himself to be killed there? Why did God send the angel Gabriel to warn Joseph and Mary to flee to Egypt? Or later on, when Jesus goes back and revisits Nazareth and they were going to throw him off the brow of the hill, why didn't he just let him do that then? Why didn't Jesus, all these times when people were going to kill him, why didn't he just die? Maybe it's because Jesus' mission to this world wasn't just to save humanity by living, suffering, dying, and rising, but also to establish a kingdom on earth, to establish God's community on this planet. Jesus came to establish a church. This is phenomenal. This is staggering, actually, that after Jesus rose from the dead, he ascended to heaven, and what did he do? He entrusted the entire mission of his life to this handful of people living in this backwater Israel 2,000 years ago. And the thing that he had been planning for years and years and years, to rescue all of humanity, he entrusted to all these random people from Nowheresville. But God had the plan to redeem humanity in his humanity, but also through his church. Almost everything Jesus does illustrates that he came to establish a kingdom on this earth. The ancient kingdom of Israel was made up of how many tribes? That's right, 12. How many apostles did Jesus call to himself? 12. And Jesus promised that he would send the Holy Spirit upon these human beings that would guide them into all truth. That's what we realize, that even though Jesus called these human beings to become the church, he would give the Holy Spirit to guide them, to lead them, and to sanctify them. This is why the church is both human and divine. The church, God's kingdom on earth, is human because it's made up of human beings. But it's also divine because the Holy Spirit is the very soul of the church. You know, this is so incredible that even the apostles don't seem to get this right away. Remember in the first chapter of the Acts of the Apostles, they asked, after Jesus has risen from the dead, he takes them over to the city of Jerusalem. And they know that Jesus is the Messiah. They know he came to establish a kingdom. They know that Jesus is God himself. And they ask Jesus, Lord, are you at this point going to establish the kingdom to Israel? Jesus' response is absolutely stunning, because he essentially says, no, I'm not. What he says is, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, till the ends of the earth. Essentially, in response to the question, Jesus, are you going to establish a kingdom? Jesus says, no, you will. He's entrusting his mission of redeeming the world to these people. They don't have the ability on their own to establish God's kingdom. So Jesus realizes, no, he knows this. Jesus knows that they don't have the power on their own to establish Jesus' kingdom. And so he promises them that he would send them the Holy Spirit from himself and from the Father. And that would be the Spirit that guided them into all truth. 10 days after this, Jesus sends that Spirit, and it happens. Now the apostles were all gathered together in the upper room with some other disciples and with Mary, the Mother of God. And they were praying for this outpouring of the Holy Spirit to come upon them. Now, they had already received the Holy Spirit when they were baptized. They had received the Holy Spirit when Jesus gave the apostles, he breathed on them and gave them the ability to forgive sins. They received the Holy Spirit when they were made the first priests in the upper room. But in this moment, as they were all praying, everyone gathered there, felt the room shake, and tongues as of fire came upon all of them. They were filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, a spirit of power and of love and of self-control. And they were given not just the mission of Jesus, they were given the power of Christ. And what they did with that was immediately to act to spread about the kingdom on this earth. That day, Peter busted out of the upper room, and he preached so powerfully with the power of the Holy Spirit that day 3,000 people became Christians. 3,000 people were baptized, and they began to follow the Lord. But they didn't stop there. Every one of the apostles who received that Holy Spirit on Pentecost, they preached throughout Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. Peter and Paul went to Rome. John went to Turkey. You have James, who went to Spain. You have Thomas, who went to India. They kept going throughout the entire world, and every Christian following them, belonging to the church, has been part of that mission to spread the kingdom on the earth. Now, that's not to say that the church is perfect. In fact, the church is filled with sinners. Remember, the church is both human and divine. To this end, Jesus told the parable that I'd like to share. He said there was once a landowner who had a field, and in that field he planted wheat. But during the night, his enemy came along and planted weeds. And as they both grew up together, his workers said to the master, to the one who owned the field, "Master, there are both weeds and wheat in your field. Shall we pull out the weeds and clear your field?" The landowner said, "No, let them both grow together until the time is right." You know, the thing is, the land belongs to the landowner. In the same way, the church belongs to the Lord. And in the church, you're going to find both saints and sinners. But we don't judge the church based off of people who fail to follow our teachings. In fact, think about this. You don't judge a teacher by the students who fail to go to class. You don't judge a hospital by the people who don't take their medicine or don't follow the doctor's orders. You judge a teacher by the students that apply themselves. You judge a hospital or a doctor by those who take the doctor's instructions. In the same way, we don't judge the church by those who fail to live up to her teachings. We judge the church by those who actually do, who take the Lord's commandments seriously, who receive His Holy Spirit and live according to that. We judge the church by her saints. From the very beginning, God has called ordinary men and women to live extraordinary lives. Some of them started out as really bad sinners. Some of them started out as decent, ordinary human beings. But all of them chose to say yes to God, to make Jesus the content of their lives and the center of their lives. And they became heroic examples of great saints. There were times in the church where it seemed like the church had more weeds in it than wheat. And it was at those times especially that God would raise up men and women. Men like St. Francis of Assisi or like Thomas Becket. Women like St. Clare or like Joan of Arc. And these men and women, by choosing God and making Him the center of their lives, they reformed the church from the inside out. And once again, the church is in need. The whole story's been building up to this moment. Everything we've heard from Noah to David, from Esther to Mary Magdalene to Peter, John Paul II, Mother Teresa, an entire 2,000-year history of saints in the church who were chosen and called by God has led to now, to you. I don't know if you realize this, but you're part of this story. You've been chosen, and you have a bigger role to play in it than you may think.